All right, it's 7 o'clock. We're time to start the Wednesday wind down with Dan and friends. Today, just me. And today I'm talking about water filtration and hydration systems that I use specifically. And I'm going to show you a couple of iterations of what I've used. And let's just kind of start off by talking about filtration. I'm definitely of the belief that filtering your water is enormously important. I know there are people that I think there's a decreasingly few minority of people that don't believe in filtering water. I'm going to be talking about mechanical filtration. I'm not talking about chemical treatment or true sterilization, right? We're not going that route. I'm talking about mechanical filters and where that goes. So a couple of different options. So I'm going to show you what I've used. And then these are my iterations. Like lots of things, I think it's good for your gear to change with your experiences. You change and also change with your knowledge. So your experience base is this, and then it's appropriate to have gear here. You don't want to be using gear that's too sophisticated for your experience level. And then it's okay to go through multiple iterations. So keep that in mind as you go through that. So cut to the chase. What am I using right now for filtration and hydration? Essentially filters and water storage. What am I doing? Well, I am using the Sawyer Micro, right? So this is it's kind of it's actually bigger than the Mini, but smaller than the Squeeze. I think I've got that right. I'll double check that and put in the notes. So the reason I picked this up is because it's barbed on two ends. It's barbed here and barbed. I can't quite see the barb. It's too dark, but this is barbed on either end. And because of the way I'm going to set this up, I wanted this one. A little better flow rate than the Mini. And it's actually, I'm very happy with this one. So performance on this has been good. It's also threaded on both ends. So it's got threads and barbs, very adaptable. So that's the Sawyer Micro. So that's the first component I'm using. And then the holding bag that I'm using, I'm not using the Sawyer bag that comes with it. I'm using a NOC Vecto. This is a NOC Vecto 2-liter bag. And this bag has the right thread on here that will fit this filter. Be aware that there is another NOC Vecto that has a different thread I want to say it's for Be Free. It's a completely different thread pitch. So make sure you're getting the right one appropriate for whatever system you're using. And I'll talk about why I use this a little bit later on, but I'm just going to tell you right now, damn strong. I love this one. This one has an open end, so we can open this up and I can use it to scoop up water straight from a source, and then it's got a roll top on it. Relatively light, but very, very strong. I'm very happy with that. So that's one. So that's what I'm using for my filter. And then in my hydration, it's been probably at least 5 years. I don't know if it's been a full 10 years. I've switched to bottles. So I'm using two Smart Water bottles. I'm using a 0.75 liter because it has a sport top on it, and the 1 liter. So this I'll carry on a shoulder strap on my pack, and then this I'll carry in my pack as my additional water. Okay. So why am I doing these? So I'm going to start off with these. I used to use a bladder, and I switched from a bladder for a couple of reasons. I did not switch initially because of durability of bladders. I had not had many bladder problems over the years, and I've heard other people that don't do hydration bladders because of durability. It took a long time before I saw a problem with that one. I did it mainly to monitor my intake. So I've been on some hot hikes in the desert, mainly probably more day hikes, and I'm getting a headache because I haven't hydrated enough. And I take out my bladder and I look at my pack, and I've got 3/4 of a liter, 3/4 of a bladder full. I've hardly drank any water, so I haven't monitored it. So with this, I'm able to monitor it, and all I need is at hand is about 3/4 liter. The other thing I'll do is I will make it a goal, especially on overnight trips, when we stop for lunch or break, that I'm going to camel up an entire liter. I'll put some sort of a drink mix in there, and I find that a drink mix adds the flavor to the water, and I will down an entire liter before we leave, and then I'll camel up and I'll bring some more along with me. The other reason I like these is these thread pitches match. So you can filter right into, well, you can't do it this way. You can filter right into this one. So I'm going to show you how this would set up. So with the Vecto bag, we can thread this right on. Beautiful. And it's, I want to get it on the right where you can see it a little bit. That can thread right on, and then I can just squirt that right into a bottle, right? So I'm gonna have to line that up, and it's gonna move around a little bit. Okay. So that's pretty convenient. But for a very small weight penalty, this coupling makes all the difference. So let's show you what that looks like. This is going to allow me to do this relatively hands-free. And it's not uncommon to do this little dance on the edge of a stream or do it in the mud. Now I can do this, right? No hands, Ma. This is just as long as this isn't too tight, so I can let some air out of this one, because there we go. It's not so tight that I can't let the air out. So now I can squeeze this into here and let this fill up on its own and not have to juggle it, just for the weight penalty of this coupling. Anybody catch this old stuff? Now I can actually do a true gravity. So for the weight penalty of a beaner and a small section of cord, I can hang this from a tree. So this is the simplest, lightest form of a gravity system. So fill this with water and it's going to gravity feed. Well, you know, people that know me, like, I want to make a more modification. So this is a very common modification where someone will hang this from a tree and just let it gravity feed. Well, I come from the irrigation and hydraulics world. So I know that another foot ahead is going to add a couple pounds of pressure. Okay, I see where you're going, Dan. So if I could move this filter down and the water bag a little bit higher, I'm going to get a little bit more water pressure. So what I can do is use just a small section of hose and connect this on here. And then I can connect this other end onto the bag. So now I got my, kind of looks like a enema, doesn't it? Kind of gross, but I've got this bag here that I can raise up several feet, and then I can get much more pressure. And the timing, I did a couple of time studies on this, and it's much quicker without any squeezing. So I've essentially added a couple of devices on here, and I've got my bag and this, no squeezing, and I can have some really convenient water. Doesn't take much time. And honestly, once you're in camp, the time isn't too big. But for me, squeezing got to be a little bit of a pain. Not as big of a pain as some other. So good question. How much do the doodads weigh? I don't know, Dave. I have that. Well, I do have it in a chart. I'd have to look. But essentially what I brought, the only additional things I brought was this section of hose, these components. So what, the coupling, which is nominal. There's a little bit of plastic to it and a little bit to the tubing here. And then the line. So another question from Doug is, in a what is the microfilter cross-section area? Mini is 44% of the squeeze. I don't know. One of the things that's really tough about testing this is I think you'd honestly have to buy a new mini, a new micro, and a new squeeze straight out of the box and then test them. Because what happens is I test a brand new filter against last year's filter, and even after 2 back flushes, it doesn't flush at the rate it should. So I end up treating these as consumable. So I'll go maybe 2 seasons and I'm going to pitch it and start with the new filter. So, but I always back flush. I've made that. Oh, here's the other thing that's really nice about this coupling, right? So if I want to back flush this, I can thread this onto here and backwards thread it onto the water bottle. Set that up. And now I can flush reverse through this just by squeezing on my bottle and squirt water on my desk. So I can reverse squirt water out of this one. So we found on our group trip that we did this last summer that this little coupling was in high demand, right? Everybody was doing it. We'd have some silt or some pollen in the water, and that would clog up the squeeze filters pretty quickly. So we were flushing maybe once a day. Sometimes I do it a couple of times a day, depending upon it. So flushing has really made a difference. Okay, so that's what I'm currently using. I'm using a Sawyer Micro, the Knock Vecto 2-liter, the hose and adapter, and then smart water bottles. So total carry, if I am in an absolutely dry section, I can carry 1.75 liters of clean and another 2 liters of dirty. So 3.75 liters of total water water capacity I have in that one. Not bad. Way more than you'd ever need in the Sierras. There's a few places where you're gonna have a dry afternoon, but yes. And yeah, I generally do replace it after every one season. Maybe I'll go every 2 seasons. So I think this has gone through one full season, then I'll probably run it a second season. So, okay, so that's what I currently use. Now I'm going to rewind. I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit and tell you from whence I came. So what I started off with was Katadyn Hiker Pro, right? A true pump, right? We're going to drop this in the water and pump this and get a squirt of water each time. Got to have the output hose that's clean, keep that separate. I ran this and a Nalgene bottle and a Camelback bladder. So I'd have 2 liters of Camelback and a liter of this. So I still got about 3 liters. Weight penalty considerably steeper. I want to say this is a touch over a pound for this kit, not counting the other devices. And then quite honestly, it's a pain in the ass to pump because you got to do this. If you look at the bottom of this, you'll see this is really scratched up because what's going to happen is if you're sitting on the edge of the creek, because you got to get it in the water and you're going to hold this at this weird angle. And if you're right-handed, you're going to do it this way, or left-handed. You're going to pump with your dominant hand and try and juggle it. At some point you get tired. And if it's for 2 people, which I think when my daughter was going with me, and it was 2 people, or when my brother, we had 2 people. It's like, it's your turn to go get water. It's like, oh, so this was kind of, this really started me on the path of getting away from pumping water. So this was back early 2000s when I was first using this. It served me and it still works. So I hang on to it. It's actually a great demo for Sierra Club classes, things like that. So my next change after that one was my goal was to stop pumping water. So it turns out I don't have it anymore. I was surprised I don't have it anymore, but I went to a gravity filter, and Sawyer makes a 2-bag gravity filter. And it's a filter that it's probably a little bigger than, it's an inline filter, a little bigger than the squeeze filter. So it's decent size, a little chunky. A dirty bag you'd fill up with water, a section of hose, and the filter, and then a clean bag. And you would hang it up and it would gravity feed down through there. Worked really well. It's fantastic for groups, but doing it for 2 people, a little bit, it definitely was a good change away from this one. And it met my goal of stopping pumping, right? So I think that was enormous, to not pump water. And as soon as I went to a gravity filter, I swore off ever pumping water again. And I won't. I will not use this. Maybe I'll put this in my earthquake kit, because this would actually be a good emergency tool to have around. So, because the filter doesn't clog up. It's pretty durable filter. Okay, so that was the Sawyer gravity filter, which I don't have. Then after I went to that, I started off with a Sawyer. So this was the first time I used a Sawyer Mini, right? So here's the Sawyer Mini. So if we compared that, there's a Sawyer Mini. This is the Sawyer. How are we going to do this? I didn't plan this very well. Okay. The Mini versus the Micro. The diameter is a little bit different too. So this is definitely a slimmer diameter. This is barbed on either end, and then it has a thread on this side. So if you want to back flush this one, you've got to have the syringe. Right? Now you don't have to everyone doesn't have to have a syringe in a group, but a syringe is kind of important to have. There are some ways you can try and back flush without a syringe, but they aren't particularly successful. So start off with a Sawyer, keep getting the names of it, the Sawyer Mini, and of course the Sawyer bags that come with one. Okay. Filter, actually pretty darn good. Bags, no. These bags, if you're using Sawyer bags, it's not if, it's when a bag is going to fail. And what you'll find is it's right here on this collar, right where this plastic insert meets the bag is the weak spot. So we had a trip where turns out we were probably clogging filters and we needed to back flush them. So the pressure was building. So we put more and more force on the bag, and it would start with the pinhole. Maybe you could glue it. And then eventually it would rip and the bag would be useless. Well, if you don't have a bag, you're kind of out of luck. So fortunately, I was using bottles at the time. So what I could have done is used one bottle as a dirty and one bottle as a clean and do that. Eventually, you're going to destroy this bottle by squeezing it too much, but that could be done. So I knew that was my backup. I think what we ended up doing was taking some tenacious tape circles and cutting and making some reinforcement on this collar, and that really helped. So this is the way it comes. Don't use this bag. I highly recommend against it. And the reason I still have this one is here's a pro tip from, I'm not a prepper, but from a pro tip from someone that wants to be prepared. I've got this and a couple other emergency supplies in the trunk of my car. So if I'm stuck someplace or there's an earthquake and I can't get home or whatever it is, right? There's some sort of disaster, I can get some water, but I'm aware that this might be a failure. So what are you going to use instead of these? Well, the first iteration, the change that I used was this was the an Evernew bag. And these were surprisingly strong compared to the Sawyer Squeeze. It's got the same collar. And what's interesting is I started looking at this when I pulled it out, and I could see some stress marks in here. But it's definitely stronger and better built than the Sawyer bags. The Sawyer bags have always been their weak spot. So something that if you're still using a Sawyer bag, I definitely recommend the Evernew, but the Knock bag would be really good. The other thing that I found the first time I used a gravity filter or the Sawyer is it's next to impossible to stick this in the underwater and have it inflate because it's a collapsible bag. The water's just going to press it closed. So you're going to have to have something. You're going to have to pour something in there. So that's when I started using a cutoff section of bottle, right? I just took a bottle, chopped off the top. I can scoop. You need some sort of a scoop. And what you can do is then you can roll your bag and store that in here and store that in your pack. So that was the technique I used for that one. Theoretically, you could use your pot, but then you'd have to fish out your pot every time you needed to get water. Yeah, so that's how I got to there. So I think at some point I was using this and I was using a bladder, and I think I had an adapter on here. I put it someplace. I had a quick coupler adapter in which I would leave my bladder inside my pack and not pull it out, and then use the Sawyer bag to push water back in through my filter to the quick coupler. I would disconnect my mouthpiece and actually pump it back in there. It seemed to work. The other problem I found with using a bladder was that if you packed your pack poorly, it'd be really hard to get water out. So you leave camp, you're 10 minutes outside of camp, 20 minutes outside of camp, you take the first sip of water and you get nothing, right? Because what's happened is that hose perhaps has kinked in there, or your bear can is pressed up against it, or worse yet is the hose has popped off and it's come off. And I only found that for the first time in 10 years. When I was out in the desert with some of my friends, and my brother brought a really old bladder and let my sister, first-time backpacker, use his really old water bladder. And it was full of water in her pack, and I was helping her do something. And the hose popped off, and it's just dumping water out of that 1/4-inch barb into her pack. And I wasn't happy because I knew like real quickly she has a down bag. We just dumped everything out of her pack. And then fortunately that bladder was sitting in a bladder sleeve and it was holding most of the water, but I dumped out a pint or two of water that it was just running into her pack. So that was the first time I've had a true bladder failure. It was old, but it's more about the convenience of it. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the questions we had, so we got the cross section. Oh, somewhere I do have a cross section of an old filter. I won't be able to get to it quick enough. But I had a Sawyer filter that was done, right? So at some point it just was, I couldn't backflush it and clean it up anymore. So I took a hacksaw to it and I just cut it. And I wanted to see what it was. And it really is like they talk about. You could see these small tubes that were maybe 1/16 of an inch. They were hollow tubes, and you could see, and I could see the crud that was in there, but you could see how much filter area there is in there, and it's kind of impressive. Another question is, what's your solution for glacial or heavy silt water? Typically a Sawyer killer, even with backflushing. And quite honestly, I have not run into that one. The worst I've run into is pollen, and pollen's pretty damn fine. And that was just this last year, and it would be try and scoop it out wherever we can. I have not had that problem with glacial water because mainly I haven't been in very many glacial areas, but I could see that being a serious issue. Now, I know that Doug has talked about this for Grand Canyon, is when you're using silty river water, is using a bucket and letting it settle out, or a bucket, letting it settle out and using some alum or something else like that, a flocculating agent to get that silt to settle out and then filter from there, which that would be super convenient. The other thing that sometimes I'll do is I won't necessarily filter all my water if I'm going to be boiling it. So if I'm cooking with water, I will do a little bit of a roll of the dice because it won't get to a 3-minute boil, which is CDC recommends contaminated water, a 3-minute boil. So I might bring it to a boil and then use it unfiltered water. So that would be another technique, but I usually don't have enough fuel to boil all of the water I'm going to consume on a trip. Okay. The thing about bladder leaks, and Doug's other comment on bladder leaks is you often don't find it until everything's wet. And I got to agree with that one. What I used to do when I ran with the bladder is I would leave it outside of the pack until I got to the trailhead, because if I'm going to tip my pack over, that's not always convenient. So at some point, if you have one mistake, one bladder issue, if you will, you can brush it off and just say it was chance. But anything more than one, I'd say it's time to go. But for me, the mistakes were few and far between, and I could brush those off. But for me personally, it was about consumption and convenience. Those were the two factors for me. Okay, let's look at the other one. So Peter's saying he likes the silicone tubing, but not the silicone bags. He likes the poly bags with fewer failures. I'm trying to figure out. So I'm assuming now I'm kind of curious that the Vecto bags, seems like the Vecto bags are silicone, but I don't know what these are. Now I got to do some research before I find out. They are surprisingly tough. But they do have a little bit of give to them. So I'm not quite sure what these are made of. Interesting company. They've got another bag that's like this. They're calling a food bag. It's a food rehydrating bag, but it's that the whole deal is it's the zip top, right? That you can easily get into it. And I think it's like this. It just doesn't have the bottom to it. So for me, I love to create and invent things, and I love to just change stuff just for the sake of changing it. So that's how I came up with this gravity thing. So I did a couple tests on my back porch, and I found it 2 to 3 times faster gravity feeding at the end of a hose. So what have I got? I've got about 30 inches of hose here. So not quite 3 feet, 24 to 30 inches of hose. So 2.5 feet of elevation before I get to the filter. So bags up here, the filter's 2.5 feet down, that it increases the speed in which it runs through the filter dramatically. And it's no big deal, right? So now occasionally what might happen is you might have a hard time finding a good branch to hang this from. So it might be lower than you want, because ideally you want all of this to just kind of line up perfectly, and it never does that. So maybe it'll be 18 inches instead of 30 inches. So you won't have all the full elevation. So yeah, Dave says Vecto's made of TPU, whatever that is. Yeah. This is true. TPU is a porous material, and that I believe that. So it's not completely, and this is a quote from their website, TPU is a porous material, and so it's not completely smell-free after production. Please clean and air prior to use. Yeah, I don't remember much smell from it, but I used to have that with even with what I'm going to assume are polyethylene Camelback bags. They'd have a new smell to them. So, and oh, the is it Big Agnes? I'm trying to think. No, it's Mental Block. Who makes the platypus bladders are polyethylene. That's a more of a film material that is absolutely inert. But even that has had some smell to it. But I think that's what I used for the longest time was the platypus, mainly because it had the big zip and it was easy to get in there. But definitely on the heavier side. So, but however you do it, right? Watch out for these bags. Know that this is going to cause you a problem at some point. Although, and I'm going to give Sawyer some credit, flush the damn filters, right? Because so you should never have to sit on the bag to get this through. So if you have to apply that much pressure, something's wrong. So it's been clogged up. So you may need to filter, you may need to flush it on a regular basis. So if you think you're going to save a little bit of weight by leaving this guy at home, bring it along, or make sure somebody in your group has it. Or if you're using a bottle, right, get this little coupling, and then now I can go directly to a bottle, and I can use the bottle as a back flush, and all you need is a little bit of clean water, and we can flush it backwards through here. So I found that this coupling is obviously, well, let's just do mass, right? So which weighs more? Yeah, this weighs a lot more than this little ring. All you need is a bottle to go onto it. So I've always found in my hydration that even when I used a bladder, I always brought one bottle. So I have always made it a rule. And when I used to mountain bike, my rule was I never put anything other than water in my hydration bladder. Never. Because I don't want to have to try and clean something porous like that. So if I'm going to do Gatorade or any other lemonade or drinks or anything like that, it's going in a bottle that I can rinse out and it's not porous. So everything else is water. Because the other thing that happens with bladders is invariably you're going to get some sort of algae or some sort of growth in there, and we want to prevent that. So it's easy to clean out, and you're less likely to have it. I'd rather have algae than bacteria any day. So, okay, that brings us real quickly to the end of talking about filters and hydrations that I have used over the years. So far, I'm really happy with this one. Actually, somebody threw in the comments, was it Sandra? Someone said that they're looking at using the BeFree by Katadyn. And there's a couple of different versions out there. There's the bag with the filter in it, so you drink right from that one. That one's kind of intriguing. There's the BeFree filter that would thread on to other things as well. So let's see if they answered right here. Because now I'm trying to juggle a couple of things all at once. So with that, we're going to call it a wrap. Next week, we're going to be back. Kelly and I are going to be talking about a local trail, Bernardo Mountain. So if you haven't been, you probably have been, but if you haven't been, we're going to give you the lowdown on it like previous times. In the first 5 minutes, you get all the stats you need, and then we'll have some footage from the hike that we took and the highlights and lowlights, if you will, on that trip. So we'll be talking about that next week. So thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you all next week or out on the trails. Take care, y'all.